Here's my game of the day from round 7 of the Biel Grandmaster Tournament, and no surprise, I've gone with a game between Alexander Morozevich and Ruslan Ponomariov. Game started out as a very normal kind of Slav. Of course, black can take on c4 here, but now we're transposing into this, well, this Botvinnik system. If black can take the game into very sharp lines like this, and so on, b5. That's the so-called Botvinnik system. But Ponomariov, in playing h6, wants to play something a bit quieter, and of course white can take here and play e3 or queen b3, g3, all these moves possible, but that's a bit calmer. But instead Morozevich played bishop h4, and that shows his intentions that he wants a sharper game. And now the really wild lines are taking on c4, this so-called Moscow gambit, and then b5 and bishop e2 and so on, and this is really wild, and that's would suit Morozevich down to the ground. But it seemed as though Ponomariov wanted to play a calmer game, and instead he just played knight d7, and now we're going back into, well, lines of the Queen's Gambit declined. Looks like something that could have been played in the Alekhine Capablanca match in 1927. Black has played the move, included the move h6 and bishop h4 very early, and this is something that Morozevich latches onto. Of course, you can play rook c1 here, or bishop d3, very orthodox Queen's Gambit. Instead, Morozevich, after a 15-minute thought, goes for queen c2. He still wanted to keep the game nice and sharp, so here, again, white can play a move like rook d1, but instead castles queenside. After the game, Morozevich said that he'd learned something from playing the game of Go, that you should be consistent in your strategy. If you start out playing aggressively, you should keep going aggressively. And this is certainly what he's done here. He wanted a real fight. And Ponomariov took on c4. Of course, the idea is that he wants to get his own play going on the queen side, followed by c5, perhaps b4, perhaps a6 and c5. But instead, Morozevich simply ignored this and started an attack on the king side with g4. It's incredible. So he's exploiting the fact that black has flicked in g5 so that he can actually open up the g-file. But of course this is a massive risk, because now black has this nice clump of pawns here on the queen side, and that prevents white's bishop going to the natural square on the diagonal. Now, if white plays g5 straight away, then black has knight h7, and this pin is rather unfortunate. So first of all, Morozevich had to play rook g1 behind the pawn, then knight d5. By the way, if black had played, well, let's say bishop b7, then this is a threat, because this is going to open the g-file, because if this one now works for white because of the rook on the g-file, and we take here and mate. So that's why Ponomariov played knight d5. Probably not a bad idea, just trading some pieces. And now, of course, g5. And of course, black can simply trade here. You can play, take on g5, threatening a mate. And black could play the knight back, or f5, something like this. But of course, you know, these weakened dart squares and this lovely knight on g5 gives white very good compensation, the open g-file. But you know, this is a big fight still. You know, white does not have any kind of advantage yet. Just an interesting position. But instead, Ponomariov basically decided to keep the position closed with h5. Well, relatively closed, because after g6, f5 keeps g5 closed, but Now there are very weak squares here, and also that h-pawn is somewhat vulnerable. So white has already wrung some concessions from black in compensation for the pawn on the queen side. So knight e5. Good move, straight in there. And this starts to clear the way. Now, Ponomaryov starts playing some inaccurate moves. He probably should have just brought his knight over here. And, you know, maybe white doesn't have a clear way forward, maybe just king b1. Said Ponomaryov chopped this knight off and then brought his knight over. But he'd clearly overlooked Morozevich's next move, which was pawn to e4, and this is very clever. This basically just prepares to swing the queen over to the king side, and already black has a very, very difficult position. So what Ponomaryov did was he tried to bring his queen over to block on the king side. If knight takes pawn, then this is incredibly dangerous. So he played instead knight g4, and after queen h3 with this crude threat, then queen g5, check. And now the black queen is helping out on the king side. It's not a beautiful square, but well, it does a necessary job of blocking out white's queen. Queen h4, excellent move. Afterwards, Morozevich was a little bit doubtful about this, but well, the computer shows this to be clearly the best move, actually. So this covers this pawn, threatens perhaps f3, perhaps h3. Morozevich thought f3 was the best move, and now this is certainly very promising for white, with the idea of rook h5, but instead black could play knight takes, and then h4, preventing white's queen from moving up to h4, and this position is still highly unclear. So anyway, queen h4, played by Morozevich, and clearly the best move. And here it's already extremely difficult for black. For example, if c5, then queen e7. Here's a nice variation. Queen e7. It's a good move. And if knight takes pawn, we have knight f7 attacking the queen. The queen comes in. Suddenly looks a little bit dangerous. A counterattack? No. Rook g5 is absolutely killing. There's the slow motion threat of rook takes here, for example, and there's also the threat of knight h6 check. If the king moves, then queen f8. Well, let me play this one for you. So knight h6 takes and queen checkmate, or king h8 and queen takes rook is mate. And if a move like pawn takes pawn here, then bishop e2, and well, white is going to get rid of this knight, and the attack continues. Ponomaryov played knight f6, which really is fatal. He'd clearly just cracked. I mean, you know, other moves offer more resistance, but now after rook g5, black has no hope in the position. So, for example, if bishop b7, then just a move like bishop h3 looks terribly strong. Lining up here, this knight can't take because of rook takes, and we threaten to take here, and suddenly, you know, this bishop enters the game as well. With this queen shut out on h6, it's a dreadful position. The game ended bishop d7, takes, e5, preventing the knight moving in here, and now the h-pawn drops, check, and this wins the queen. That's why he played bishop e2, and it's game over. Queen e7, and here Ponomarev resigned. Too much threatened. Rook g1, queen takes pawn, queen takes knight. That's quite enough. So Alexander Morozevich continues his extraordinary tournament, lots of ups and downs, but we're always guaranteed great excitement and entertainment from him.